Hello and welcome to RPG Book Club, I believe number 63. This time we're looking at We Are the Land, which is a one-page RPG, so it should go by pretty quickly. And it's one I've looked at before, so I have some previous thoughts I can add in as well. We are the land. For over a millennia, you and your coven of immortal guardians have watched over this site of power. This point of magical energy must be protected, lest its powerful magics be unleashed upon an unprepared world. But now a group of mortals have dared to disturb this sacred location, and must be taught the error of their ways. Your goal is simple. The interlopers must be driven away, lest they damage or destroy your home. Whether you gruesomely murder and consume them, bewitch and enslave them, or scare the sanity from them, the choice is yours. So I think that works pretty well as an introduction. Gets the point across, at least. Each guardian has 4 attributes: anger, physicality, bloodthirstiness, ability to commit violence, dread, sneaking, causing terror in mortals, breaking the minds of lesser creatures, enlightenment, sharing your knowledge, reminding a mortal of the old way, convincing a mortal to aid you, weird, using modern technology, interacting with the supernatural. I wonder if that last one means using modern technology through supernatural means rather than just literally using it like a person would, because that would seem to be a bit of an odd category to have under weird in that case. If you look at these 3 sort of victory conditions, you have anger seems to relate to the conception, dread to the scaring the sanity, and enlightenment perhaps to bewitch and enslave, but that doesn't really seem to directly translate, and then weird doesn't really have, a direct analog out of the victory conditions. So that's just sort of interesting to note. You roll a d8 to see what form you take. I'll play along with this since I don't really have, since this will go by pretty quickly otherwise. Alright, a d8. That is a 6. So that would make me a small humanoid, a tiny creature like a pixie or gnome. And I have no anger. I have 1 dread, 2 enlightenment, and 1 weird. I suppose that makes sense depending on the, background you're going with for pixie or gnome. Right? This one, looking over the other options just to make sure they're all also relatively well thought out. There's resembling a human that is slightly something wrong with it. That's a fun option. And you mostly have enlightenment for weird for that. Not a lot of dread or anger. Which makes sense, though maybe there should be 1 dread to represent the terribly wrong part. Giant beast. Yeah, and that having a lot of anger makes sense, and it also has 1 dread and 1 enlightenment, but not a lot of supernatural abilities. You can even be a dragon under that option, that's fun. A mass of small creatures such as rats, bats, or insects for swarm. Some anger, together the swarm can have some physical force to it. A lot of dread in comparison to anger, that makes sense for a swarm of creepy crawlies. No enlightenment, so I think that means not a lot of individual wisdom / intelligence, so there may be some sort of consciousness to the collective. And then some weird. So I think the stats also fit for that as well. No set form. That's fun, and you just get 1 of everything for that, and you're sort of just an energy being. Hybrid creature, some form of chimera sort of thing, it looks like for that. Or something simpler like a centaur. And that's mostly anger and dread. Yeah, not a lot of enlightenment or weird. That makes sense, because it definitely seems like the emphasis is on the physical form there, but obviously for some variations of it, Like Centaur, you might argue that, there should be some enlightenment, but generally the stats make sense there. A small humanoid, that's me. Living element of the land. Dryad or rock golem, some anger, no dread, some enlightenment, a lot of supernatural abilities. I guess that makes sense. The mostly weird for an elemental. I guess that really depends on how you view it. Combine. Roll twice and combine the result to create a unique form. Choose one of the stat blocks of the forms you rolled to use. That's pretty interesting. I think choosing one of the stat blocks kind of defeats the purpose to an extent. You could also give them the option of averaging it, though they would have to, know enough about math to know how to round and stuff to make it appropriate. Let's see. Yeah, I was going to look at the stat spreads because they seem to link up well to the creature, but isn't there any stat that is severely underrepresented? Let's see. Off the top of my head, I'm not really seeing anything that seems super underrepresented. I'm not, looking very hard into it, but it seems well balanced. So, yeah, I'd say this is a good spread. Now, let me see what powers I have. That's exciting. D10 for this. Alright, a 6 again. Weather manipulation. You can control the weather by summoning thick fogs or calling down lightning bolts. So I'm a small humanoid creature with weather manipulation. What sort of fits together with that? And I feel like in a lot of things, pixies or fairies can be associated with wind, so I guess a pixie or fairy works. I'll wait around and see if I think of anything better. Well, let's look at what the other abilities would be. Shapeshift, appropriate life drain, foul secretions. It's a little more specific one. Invisible. That could be very fun to play with. Deal maker. Now that would potentially be hard to play with for a creature that mainly focuses on anger, but with the dread element that would help as well. Because you could just threaten people into making deals, so still certainly workable. Weather manipulation, yeah, that's the one I have. Hypnosis. Phasing. That one would be fairly interesting with anger because it gives you a lot of coverage because you can, physically hurt things and then also manipulate them without necessarily having the stats to do it. Phasing, you can move through solid objects. You can control nature. Move objects with your mind. Those are all fairly good powers. I'm trying to think if there's anything obvious missing. You can argue there's nothing to cause fear or insanity effects, but since there's already a stat for that, you don't really need it, I suppose. There's no just really being physically strong power, but then that's covered by a stat. Entering dreams, I think, is a very common, ability for this kind of thing, but I don't see it there. It's not like you need it or anything, but that's something that might be missing you could consider. no teleportation or being able to be or see multiple places at once. So there's definitely some stuff you could add to here that I think would fit the theme, but I don't think it's missing anything that's catastrophic or anything like that. Right, now let's see weaknesses. Now, with the way I'm recording this, there isn't really a way to get that all in very well. That's about the closest I can get. Let's see what I've got. Yeah, and this was a D10 still. 7. Different number this time. Stupid, you are impossibly stupid and are easily fooled. For a tiny fey creature, that seems like a pretty big weakness. I'm trying to think if this adds anything to the way I might think of my character. This in general, I think, is a very good weakness to have in a folklore-based thing, given how often there's stories of supernatural beings being tricked and stuff. But the other ones are, bound. You have to stay within a mile of the site of power. That seems like maybe too workable of a weakness for a game that, you would think takes place around the site of power pretty much the whole time. So this one maybe should be reworked a bit. Silver, yeah, classic. Light, also classic. Fire, and specifically being afraid of it. Great hunger. You have a hunger that cannot be satisfied. I would certainly make it harder to hide your presence if you're just killing creatures to eat as well as, the enemies. Truthful, almost always trade the truth. Holy symbols. Vanity. I think these are all great weaknesses. Again, I'm trying to think if there's anything obvious missing for this kind of game. Like, I don't know if it's that in line with folklores, but just from a game perspective, you could have the weakness of, being physically overpowered or feeling pain a lot, but that does kind of conflict with the anger stat. It would be a huge nuisance to have, high anger stat and an inability to really engage in physical combat, so I could see why that would be a bad choice. Yeah, like some of the other stuff I can think of, like always having signs associated with your presence that would really fit the theme, would also sort of ruin certain stats, like the ability to sneak would kind of really be messed up by that. So I think this is a very good coverage for weaknesses. Alright. And what the site of power is. This is sort of the last thing that could really influence my character, so I'll try to finalize it at this point. Alright. I'm back. Let me see what I've got here. D6. That is a 4. A cave. A secluded cave high on a snow-swept mountainside. So if I'm controlling the weather, a lot of it is going to be snow-based. Trying to think of like a little small snow-based creature that I could come up with. I don't really have any great ideas. I'll probably just stick with a, sort of more snow-based fairy-ish creature. more associated with the unseelie side of things, I believe. Based on the association with snow. I don't know how traditional that is, but in fantasy, that's where things tend to run. And probably with bat wings instead of more insect like wings, just to fit with the dark, wintry theme. But let's see what the other options were. I am thinking that maybe it would be good for, a thing of this sort to come with a bunch of examples of folklore creatures to help give people ideas and stuff. That would be a nice supplement to this. But anyway, a set of overgrown standing stones perched atop a windswept hill. A hidden pool deep within a treacherous bog. A towering ancient tree nestled within its forest. Its bark depicts the outline of a face. Stone idol, an ancient weathered stone idol set on a beach facing out to sea. Flower circle, a perfect circle of blooming flowers at the center of a grass meadow. See, what's interesting is all of these except mine seem a little inherently mysterious or magical. Like, I guess you can argue that, a cave is inherently mysterious, but ultimately, mine is just a cave on a mountain with snow, something that is, incredibly normal, where you've got other stuff like, stone idols, trees with faces, pools that are within bogs, so I'm assuming, based on this, that it's a different kind of water. It's not just more bog, it's like a clear pool that is hidden by a bog. Inexplicable standing stones or a perfect circle of flowers, and then you've got a cave on a mountain. It's mine is kind of something that stands out as something that is not super mysterious or magical seeming. Right, and let's see who's disturbing the site. 2. So it is a group of teenagers who have wandered to a snowy cave on a mountain to get drunk, listen to loud music, and party. A very poor choice of venue on their part, but, those teenagers, they show up when you least expect it. The other options were construction crews trying to build a mall, academics that are trying to perform archaeological study, gang of criminals. Now, this does have the option of 2 rival factions, which is interesting. A film crew and a military unit. These are all pretty good, classic examples of people that interfere with sites like this in stories or horror films or such. So I think this is a pretty good spread. Yeah, there isn't a group of, you could add like hippies or something that might be well-meaning but are misguided. Misguided hippies is another trope that you're not really seeing here. People trying to research the folklore of the area. Oh, well, never mind. Yeah, there's that. What else could you have? And you could have explorers too. But this is pretty good coverage. Of another area that might work for a site of power. Yeah. We've already got forests. We've got forests, bogs, hills, mountains, beaches, and grass meadows. There's nothing really for a desert, which is a little bit of a less common setting for this kind of thing, but certainly not unheard of. You could have like a ruin in a desert or a broken pyramid or something. If you wanted to go more urban, you could go in like an abandoned area of a city. Uh, some sort of cursed house or something, or a graveyard at the edge of an old town or something. I think if you wanted to go something that was a little closer to humans and still fit within the theme. Okay, now here we get to the actual mechanics. When the Guardians attempt an action, the outcome is in doubt. Roll a d6 and add the attribute that just describes the action. If the total is 5 or higher, the action succeeds. Total is below 5. Increase the Guardian who is doing the action's peril total by 1. Then roll another d6. If the result is below the current peril number of the Guardian, something bad happens. Something bad can take many forms, be it the victims discovering the Guardian's weakness, successfully trapping one of the Guardians, or in the worst case, inflicting a mortal wound on the Guardian. So it says one of the Guardians. Let me make sure I understand exactly how many there are supposed to be. So you're part of a coven, in the group of mortals. So there are multiple guardians, and one of them is you, but it's not clear if you're also responsible for the actions of the other guardians. Okay, all the guardians can communicate telepathically with each other. They are also assumed to be able to speak, however, depending on their form, they may struggle to talk. And finally, remember, this is your land and it will not be disturbed. So, something I remembered and turned out to be true is that this is not at any point very specific about how, the game is played in terms of, how many people are players and whether there's a players and a GM or just all players or stuff like that. To me, this kind of thing would actually be best if there is one player that is the guardian and the rest of the players are the interlopers, and that's kind of adversarial. Because that definitely sounds fun and really fits with a horror theme, but it might be a little difficult to run unless you also have a GM. But it looks like what I would guess, based on what I've read from here and here, the expected format is that it would be a group of players who are all guardians. And maybe they would each be a different kind of guardian because they'd each be rolling. That would actually be kind of interesting. But anyway, a group of players who are all guardians versus a group of interlopers who are perhaps represented by a GM or something. Yeah, so I went back to the game page to double check, and it really doesn't say anything about, distribution of players versus GM or who has what role and stuff like that. Like I said, I think it's supposed to be a party of guardians who are players and then perhaps a GM for the interlopers. But looking back at what I said, I think Great Hunger Weakness could be a little clearer about how it is used against the Guardian. I don't really think that's necessary looking back. And there could be a few more monstrous forms. I think the mix and match one really helps with that. But, this is something that's kind of missing there, right? That's like something that would really fit with the aesthetic of this, I think, but isn't covered. Yeah. Right now, it's not really specified how it's supposed to work, and there's not a lot of guidance. Yeah, and there are some ways you could modify that, like not always being control of guardians in certain ways would make sense. Yeah, and then I think
really necessary is stuff on what determines how the interlopers do things, because that's not really covered. I think it's implied that guardians are players, but whether the interlopers are supposed to be doing things based on a GM or just sort of passively existing as a threat, and then they only do anything when a guardian fails a check and something bad happens, per se. It's just really not clear how the interlopers are supposed to interact, and there's definitely a couple different ways you could play that or modify that to just give a bit more guidance. The last thing I want to talk about is just really focusing on this and if it makes sense. So, the highest an attribute ever is, it appears, is 2. So, rolling a d6 plus 2, that's 1 to 3 a success and 3 to 6 a failure. So, at best, there's a 50% chance of success each time you attempt something, and that's at best. Now, however, the consequence for failure is the action does not succeed, but nothing bad necessarily happens. Yeah, so say you're still working with a stat that is plus 2. Then the baseline would be 3 if you get a 1. So you would have to have failed 4 times to have a chance of something bad happening on a stat you have a 2 in. You would have to have failed 2 times if your stat is 0 and 3 times if your stat is 1. And that's all just to have a chance of failure in the first place. So even though you're not going to be successful very often, because even with a max stat, the chance of success is only 50%, it takes at least 2 failures to actually have a chance of something bad happening from it. So I think, if you're specifically using a 0 stat very often, then that, can be a bit punishing, but likely you're not going to want to use a stat that's at 0. And there's really no incentive because there's so little specifics on roleplay or how things work. It seems like there's at this point little incentive to ever do anything except use your highest stats. Add the attribute that best describes the action. It's obviously important who's determining this. Because, a lot of time players are really going to be shooting for whatever their highest stat is. So overall, I think this is a good framework for a game. I think all the character creation stuff and setting and antagonist stuff is fun. I think the system of, unlikely success, but consequences only build up over time is sort of interesting and fits a more horror themed setting with a build up of stuff. And then, the big thing I would qualify as an issue is that there's just no real guidance on how the game is actually organized between players, or how many successes it takes to actually achieve victory, or whether there's a GM or anything like that. Right now, it's to an extent hard to even call this a game. It is sort of a suggestion of mechanics and lore and character creation stuff, and then the game, quote unquote, what the game actually looks like is very open-ended, which in a lot of systems can be absolutely fine, but for this one, because it's not exactly your standard party of adventurers going on an adventure, because it's a designed to be a one-shot with a specific goal, and you effectively play the antagonist, there really should be a bit more guidance about what the game actually is, or at least a set of options. It could also, in theory, use, just a couple more pages of random folklore ideas would be fun, I think. That's about my thoughts on this one, though. It's definitely a very fun thing to look at. If you wanted to actually play it, you might have to fill in the blanks, but that's hardly the worst thing in the world. I would definitely recommend checking it out and trying to use it if it sounds interesting to you. Actually, I had intended to just mess around with a character, quote unquote character I made a bit. Uh, just sort of estimating what a game might be like, so I should try that now. If I remember right, I am a, sort of bat-winged ice fairy that is protecting a secluded cave on a snow-topped mountain, and I can't remember. Yeah, I think it was a group of teenagers that I was going up against. Maybe that's completely wrong and I just forgot, but... So how would my character try to dissuade these teenagers? Let's see, they're set up outside the cave. Let's say they're nearer to the bottom of the mountain. It's a small mountain, because that gives me more time to mess with them before they get to the site. What exactly would I try to do to dissuade them? I can control the weather, so that's mainly what I would be trying to do. So I guess first I'd just try to set up a small blizzard to slow them down. And I would roll a d6. Then add the relevant stat. I'm just trying to use my power to control a blizzard. I suppose I'm trying to scare them. So you could consider that weird or dread, I think. I am a small humanoid. Dread and weird are both ones, so it doesn't really matter. And I would get a 4 for that. So the blizzard would fail. I don't know if I would fail to do a blizzard at all, or it would just fail to scare them. Since it's my power to control weather, I guess I would say that it, the blizzard happens, it just doesn't really affect them at all. What else was I gonna say? So yeah, that would fail. They would keep climbing up the mountain. I'd say I'll give myself a few more chances to start stopping them before bad things happen. But anyway, that advances my peril by 1. Next, I think I'm gonna try and fly down and freeze all their water supplies, let's say. And this is a smarter attempt, so I'm gonna go with Enlightenment for it, which is a higher stat for me. Once again, I get a 4, so I fail. My peril's at 2. Actually, I think I wasn't paying attention to something. Yeah, now that I realize it. Yeah, okay, so now that I think about it, rolling to see whether you succeed or fail on peril, I don't think it's actually supposed to be associated with a particular stat. Not necessarily the stat that you initially made the roll on either. So that definitely makes it far easier to face consequences. So than I had originally projected. My peril's at 2 right now. I'm gonna re-roll. I get a 6. I'm still fine, luckily. But I have failed twice to actually get these guys. I'd say they're starting to get suspicious that something weird is going on. That's why my peril is going up. My weakness is stupidity, so I suppose when I get in trouble it will be because of that, but I don't know if they're supposed to be doing things already to try and mess with my stupidity, or I'm just going to narrate how it was stupidity that was my downfall when inevitably, I failed the peril or whatever. So that didn't work either.
How else would I dissuade teenagers? I'm just gonna do something really stupid and try to control the weather, because that's mainly what I do, to try and make snow sculptures of, you know, attractive silhouettes partying nearby somewhere else on the mountain to see if that can mess with the teenagers a little. They're teenagers, so they gotta fall for this one. Let's see. And this would be, I guess I'm trying to, like, yeah, I'm sort of bewitching them a bit more with this, so I'd say enlightenment or weird. I'll just do enlightenment because that's, the higher stat. Let's roll. And I got a 5 this time. So finally, I'm successful. They've moved somewhere else on the mountain. They're, distracted for a bit. That gives me more time to set up. I'm going to say I only have to succeed one more time to get them to just go away from the mountain. But they're probably upset when they figure out it's just snow statues. I doubt doing the same thing twice is going to work. So I'm just gonna try to do another blizzard to try and make it so they can't find their way back to their camp or supplies. They hadn't really set up a camp, but let's say they left some things behind in their rush to see this other party, so. Okay, 5, so that's a success, whatever it is. I stop them from going back, they're lost, they haven't managed to get back to some of the supplies they dropped. They decide to either just camp out for the night and then leave, or start down the mountain already. So you can see how the game sort of works as is, even without any guidance, but it's a little hard to really tell how you're supposed to do things, I feel like. But that was reasonably fun. It could maybe work as a journaling thing if you wanted it to, but I think it definitely needs more about the game itself. And also, I figured out that I was wrong about how peril is supposed to work. That definitely is potentially extremely punishing, because it can be a bit hard to succeed. And, once you have once you've failed twice, there's like a 1 in 6 chance of something bad happening. I guess it's still not that punishing. It really depends on how you interpret something bad happening.